Hey everyone, it's Kristen from Kristen April's Art, and today I have a tutorial on coloring using this Shine coloring page available on my Patreon site and some Crayola markers. I have here the Super Tips, which comes in a set of 50, as well as the original broad Crayola markers. And the reason I found this little hack was because my nephew had been using my watercolor paints, and as you can see, when a 3-year-old is left with paints, what can happen? It looks like something's growing in there, and I'm afraid to use these, so I had to get creative and come up with something that could take the place of these watercolors. So I have a watercolor paintbrush, nothing fancy, just run-of-the-mill cheap brush. It is a size 5 round brush, and it works pretty well for what we're using. I also have a paper towel, a clean cup of water, just in a little cup from recycled fruit cup. And I grabbed a shallow glass dish from my cabinet. You could use any non-porous surface, plastic, glass, whatever. I just grabbed this because my paint palette was dirty. So to get started, you might want to use some real watercolor paper. This is just smooth cardstock that I'm using. But you want to start by getting your brush wet, make sure it's clean. You don't want to get any leftover paint on your picture if it's not clean, and just start layering in a little bit of water. You don't want to use too much water because if your paper gets saturated, it will start to buckle and warp. And then you just choose a color you want to use from your markers and color straight onto your palette that you're using. And take a bit of water and mix that right into the color. And you can see right away how it becomes like a watercolor paint. And then just go ahead and start painting right on top of where you added the water. And you want to work in small sections when you're doing this. And this is why this page was good for this project, because it's full of little small areas to paint in. The more water you add to your color, the lighter the color is going to be. And you can just use your brush to kind of work in some areas. And if you want an area darker, I'm just kind of tapping my brush on the paper and it's making small little puddles. And it's going to give it a little bit of interest, a little bit of depth, instead of it all just being one solid color. And this is what I really like about watercolors, is that you can get lots of different effects from it, all just by using one color and some water. And I am by no means an expert in watercolors. I just play with it until I get the result that I like. Now, if you use a tissue, you can dab your paper to pick up some of that water. It will also pick up some of the color that you had put down, but it will also help to dry your paper faster, and it won't get as warped by letting the water sit there and dry. So again, following the previous steps that we just did, you will just continue with the other shapes or sections of your coloring page, and we're going to choose a different color this time. I have a bit of orange here, and as you can see, it's really bright when you lay it down, but when you mix it with water, it mutes that color a little bit. And just move that paint around. And what I really love about watercolors is the bleed that it has, and the movement that it has when you have a nice wet surface to lay your colors down on. Now to go into the corners, I'm just dotting with my brush to make little puddles and smoothing that out. and do it in each corner. And you can see already just by adding a second layer of color that it's quite a bit darker, so you can take your brush and clean it off and just with water, just plain water on your brush, work those colors into each other so it's not so harsh of a transition between the two colors. Now you can pick up that puddle by having a dry brush and just running it over the area that got too wet. Again, clean your palette out in between colors. Now if I had my paint palette, I wouldn't have to do that each time, but we're just kind of improvising here. Make sure you have a clean brush each time. And again, we're going to just continue by adding some water, some color to our palette, and some water to our color. And for smaller areas, you don't have to use as much color on your palette because the water does tend to give you a little bit more than what you started with. And I think I'm going to add a little bit darker yellow to this because the color just looks a little bit flat. So I'm just choosing a darker shade of yellow. And let's see how this comes out by just adding a little bit to one end. And already you can see it's a little darker, but not quite dramatic enough. So just a tad bit of orange. I don't want to use too much. And pick that up with the brush and just add it right to there. And that looks much better already. And you can just work that in with your brush and the water that's already there. And with a clean brush, just go in and smooth out those lines a little bit. And again, you don't want to work this area too much. I'm going to pick up some of that water with the tissue so it doesn't warp the paper, because again, if you rub back and forth on this type of cardstock paper, it's going to tear the paper and you're going to get little pills on your paper, like little balls of residue from the paper. So it's, you know, ultimately it's good to have proper watercolor paper, but I didn't have any when I was printing this out, so we're just using what's available. And I love just watching watercolor do its thing. So, you know, just by having a wet surface and dotting an area like that, then you can kind of just see how it spreads and moves around the paper. And again, I think that's just the beauty of using watercolor, is that it's not, you know, it definitely doesn't have a flat look to it. So again, just little dots to kind of add some shadow to my areas. And, you know, just play with it. There is no rhyme or reason to, you know, how you want to color your shadows in this instance. This is just, you know, kind of like a jewel here. So light hits it on its different facets and edges, and, you know, no right or wrong way to do this. So just experiment and have fun with it. Let's see if, well, I'll do it in a second. I want to show you guys when I don't put water down first, the difference that it looks like. And you can also have some fun with this by, after you have put down your color, if you add a little bit of table salt to the top of it, the way the salt reacts with the water gives it a very interesting effect. And I didn't do it in this video, but it's definitely something fun you can experiment with on your own. And when the salt is dry, then you just, you know, wipe it off with your finger or a tissue, and the effect that's left behind is really rather neat. The salt crystals kind of spread out like almost like a snowflake effect, and it's really rather nice. But again, here I'm just using my little dotting puddle effect. And when you want to get into the small areas, you just use the tip of your brush. And when you want to color in more of a larger area, you can use the side of your brush. So let's clean this color out here. So now we're going to move on to just another section of the area and continue as before by adding the water. And the water cup that I have here is starting to get a bit discolored, but since it's not showing up on the paper yet when I'm laying down the water, I'm just going to keep going. But if you start to notice that when you're laying down the water first that it's not clear, then you might want to dump out your water and start with a new fresh bowl. So going in with a bit of a darker yellow, we're just going to again follow the steps as before. I'm sorry if you can hear my dog snoring in the background. He likes to get himself on camera, whether it's barking or snoring, but I will take the lesser of two evils, which is the snoring. And again, with the watercolors, just keep in mind that it's not perfect. You will probably go out of the lines, and that's okay. That's kind of the organic look that I like about watercolors. Also, if you have any hand challenges or impairments or arthritis or anything like that, this is really rather easy on your hands. You don't have to press as hard as you would with colored pencils or even markers. Now I'm going to do this little spot here without putting down the water first to show you how that will look. And I'm just going to color a little bit because we don't need much. It's a very small area. And mix the water right with the color and see what it does without having the water on the surface first. It doesn't move around quite as nicely. It's more along the lines if you would have just colored it straight with a marker. The color is a little bit brighter than if we would have put water down first. And here let's just show you with a bit of a darker shade of the same color how you can mix the darker shades with the lighter shades. You don't need to clean it off in between uses for this. And try another smaller area to see how that works. It still goes down as nicely. It doesn't move around as much, so you'll have less instances of going out of the lines. Kind of like a marker would. And clean off your brush before going on to the next one. If your paper towel starts to get too dirty or wet, you could always just, turn it over or flip it inside out or just grab a new one, but I tend to use mine until they're sogging wet. So I'm going to continue on as before by wetting my paper because I do prefer that method. I did when I first started trying to use my Crayolas as watercolors. I found this method by experimenting, and of course it didn't turn out right the first time I did it, which was I just colored straight onto the paper and then used water to try to move that color around, and that was not effective. It didn't work. It just kind of messed up the paper. So then I tried it this way, and as you can see, it works much, much nicer. So everything is in art is just experimenting, learning the process, learning from your mistakes, learning from others' mistakes, and just getting your creativity and ideas out onto paper. So you would just continue on like this until your page is finished. And here is my finished version. You can see I messed up the paper a bit, and you can see all of the areas that I went out of the lines. I also added a splatter effect by loading my brush up with water and using my finger just to tap the droplets on top. So thank you very much for following along, and please share your creations with me on my social media channels. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe.